My why is because I believe every single person deserves to be heard. That every single person has greatness within them.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Master Your Life. This is Kate McKay, your host, and I'm really excited to introduce my guest for today. Drum roll, Aaron Trahan. Welcome, Aaron.
Hey, Kate. I've been looking forward to this conversation and looking very much forward to a good jam session with you.
Me too, because we share some things. I love this. So I'm just going to give a little bio. Aaron's nearly two-decade career in executive leadership includes significant roles in both corporate and startup environments. Just right there is pretty amazing. By the age of 30, Aaron's early business achievements had propelled him to senior executive positions at a billion-dollar publicly traded company. His unique ability for growing people, elevating teams and organizations, and relentlessly pursuing peak performance led him to develop a passion for business coaching and speaking to organizations about how to find new levels of success. Bam, home run right there.
There it is.
So yeah, there you are. There you are. So take me back. What was something when you were young that you heard that you were too much of? Too what? What did you hear, Aaron? What was the story?
The answer is in the question. I was too young. You're not ready. You're not mature enough. And yeah, I mean, luckily I was in an organization that there just wasn't a whole lot of layers, very bootstrapped, and got access to a lot of the mechanisms of how the business operated. The business itself was going through a transition of going from a private company to soon to be IPOing. And so, yeah, I got a lot of the inside story there. And what I immediately picked up on was something that this isn't exclusive to this company, but for really any company, is that when you can cut through the noise and just simply get things done and just execute, it adds a tremendous value to the organization. And because of my ability to see that, and maybe I was too young and dumb enough to be scared to do things others weren't able to, it allowed me to assume a leadership role at an early age that I was then able to take advantage of and to keep scaling my career up. But along that path, back to your question, was yeah, constantly being told that, we can't do this, we can't do that. And my lack of experience didn't accept that. I was not cool with just doing things the way that what was always done. And so I was kind of the rebel in that type of environment that was able to get things done that other people couldn't.
You just broke through. But how was your childhood? When I was asking about telling me about like the things you heard too much of, I was thinking about you as being a littler person. So what about in your family or growing up, teen years, or even when you were younger, a little squirt? What'd you hear that you were too of? What comes to mind?
It was kind of just, with the area that I grew up in was rural Southeast Texas, right? So it's the small town vibe, small town thinking, which isn't a bad thing, but it's not exactly a place for a dreamer, someone who wanted to go out and do big things. And even family members. I still remember my grandfather telling me, is like, you need to stop, get your head out of the clouds type of thing. And, just we grew up in a town where it was very common and look, there's nothing wrong with this, but to kind of marry your childhood sweetheart, stay local, kind of go to, one of the local oil and gas industries. And yeah, I just always kind of viewed things a bit differently. And so, yeah, I think one of the things that I may have been accused of at an early age was kind of thinking a little too big, which in a small town environment doesn't always align with kind of the status quo thinking of everyone around you. And so luckily I was, able to not be afraid to be different. And I think that's what keeps a lot of people from a mindset standpoint. It's amazing how we can adapt to our environment, and that may not always be a good thing if you have bigger aspirations than those around you.
What did your parents think of this big dreamer son?
Yeah, I think, it's just supportive. I'm not sure how much stock they actually put into my ability to execute on some of these things, but it's like, oh, that's good. Let those creative juices flow, right? But then when it started to kind of come together, it's like, oh, he really is going to leave. He is going to go to different places. He's going to move away type of thing. And so yeah, it was that interesting dynamic of think big, just maybe not too big because we want you close, but no, but always very supportive through the process.
So how important do you think that is for most successful people to have that support of a parent? Because very few people do, Aaron.
For sure. And whether it comes from a parent or some other type of mentor or guiding force, I mean, I do think support is very valuable. I think it is important for us to have that voice of influence from those that are further ahead in the journey than we are. It's hard to always have what I kind of call the microscope mindset where you can zoom in and execute, but able to zoom out and see the full playing field and see around corners. That level of perspective, awareness, and clarity is extremely difficult for us to develop on our own. So whether it's your parents, whether it's the mentor, whether it's another advisor, I think we all need help in being able to see the forest through the trees and see around corners for things that can slow us down that we're not able to perceive on ourselves.
Who was that for you, the visionary that taught you perspective?
Yeah, it came from a lot of different places. I think there were some parental kind of guidance there of just kind of learning by example with the way that my parents kind of approach certain things. There were other kind of mentors and kind of associations that I was a part of. But it was also, and this is another thing that I like to tell young leaders is don't ignore your future self because advice can come in many shapes and forms, some of which you're going to have to ultimately decide which of this advice is actually applicable to me, or am I just receiving somebody else's winning lottery ticket? And so another important voice that I don't want to discount was that of my future self, where I wanted to be, why I wanted to be there. And
when did you meet him, though? Because I think that's even something that's very, very difficult for people to even comprehend. But it sounds like in some ways that relationship with that future self, that future vision that you had of you made you fearlessly be able to say, no, thank you. Yes, please. No, thank you. Which I would call that it gave you this elite sense of discernment. Because you do have a high level of it just innately, and whether it was something developed, most likely developed, but how do we teach that?
I think exposure. I mean, if you're not exposed to something, it's gonna, kind of be one of the things that you start operating it in an environment where you don't know it could be different. And for me, my dad was a senior leader at a company. And so I was exposed to business at an early age, which really piqued my curiosity. And so, started to subscribe to Fortune magazine when I was in high school. My friends used to always complain because they would come over and it's like, why are you watching CNBC? Like, what does all this even mean? And even for me, having that interest to learn about business, right? I remember a time where I started watching CNBC. I had no idea what the tickers at the bottom of the screen even meant, but I was curious. I kept learning. And yeah, just kind of looking at some of the business success stories that you could read about. I was an avid reader even as early as high school. And so for me, that's probably what started planting a lot of seeds around what the potential could be, what I could aspire to be. Was sometimes we've got to zoom out just from our own surroundings. And for me, books and reading about biographies and business stories was wildly impactful for my mindset to go beyond what was just in front of me in my current environment.
It's so powerful. I love that. I'm a crazy ass reader, not right, always and forever. What are you reading now, Aaron? What you got on your bedside table?
Oh, yeah. It's kind of a combination of a new book versus one of my old-time favorites. And one of the books that I just finished was actually the book written by the former CEO of Yum Brands, David Novak. And I just love the title of his book, which is How Leaders Learn. And it's just really a story of how he was able to find success after success after success by not being a know-it-all, but by trying to maintain that beginner's mindset. And it just really highlighted a point for me that being a lifelong learner is one of the most sustainable competitive advantages that you can give yourself. Don't ever let success get in the way for you still being the best student in the room, even if you're the highest ranking person in the room. So that was a new book that, yeah, I've just really been jamming on. And at the same time, kind of what I refer to as one of my old faithfuls is the book Execution, written by Larry Bossidy and Ram Charan, which is kind of considered one of the world's greatest business consultants. And it's just one of those that I kind of come back to. I think it was that book was written in 2002. So every other year I bring it back and just kind of reread it, just because the principles of how you're able to cut through the noise, get things done, and execute will never go out of fashion. That will never be obsolete. And as a matter of fact, as we're going into a period where you could argue change is happening at a faster pace than it ever has before, the ability to get things done almost just becomes more valuable over time. And so that's kind of, those are the two books that I've been spending a lot of time in lately.
I'm grabbing both of those. I just read recently what's that book? The Something Executive. It's like this old one by Draper, I think.
Oh, The Effective Executive.
I loved that book because
Yeah.
it was so research-based and it was so old science, but it was so applicable. It made me fall in love with the word execute, because like you and I were talking before we hit play, it's like, systems are sexy, but so is execution. Execution is hot because, like you said, the people that can execute are the ones that are going to win, and admitting failure as well. So you talk about the success of businesses, and I would say this doesn't matter if we're talking about athletes, parenting, relationships, the way you approach your spirituality, that so much is based on taking that ambition, that desire that you have, and executing on it. Can you explain a little bit more on that, on your thesis around that, and where your apparent lack of fear, or able to channel fear, works in that massive gap that most people are afraid to take the leap over?
Yeah, I partially blame this on the media, right? And we've been suckered into believing that, business success is all around like creating that big idea, that big strategy, the big earth-shattering thing. And reality is not like that, actually. And so a very big, bold idea that may be tough to execute for a team or for an organization will actually set you back way farther than just having a good idea that can be executed on at an extraordinarily high level. Really focusing on the basics and doing the basics at a world-class level consistently is something that, I see as a big disconnect, right? It's like, you look over the past 5, 10, 15 years, and it's like there's this whole appeal around like startups being sexy and coming up with these disruptive things. And, it's not about the bigness or the boldness of the idea. You give me a company that has even a simple idea, but can wrap an organization around executing that idea at a very high level. I'm putting my money on that company, not the company that's just ideating with this big idea, because it's all about execution. And there's so many stories, right? And Apple was not the first manufacturer of a smartphone. Facebook was not the first social media platform. Google was not the first search engine. They just
Microsoft.
had idea. I mean, the list goes on and on and on across every industry imaginable. And so it really comes down to the ability to execute. And, back to that comment around the fear of kind of, or being fearless to break down the barriers. It's really breaking things down into the smallest, most simplest chunks that can be executed on, that you can drive alignment on, that you can create and harness focus on moving the ball forward. And so instead of trying to go from 0 to 100, you really focus on just being consistent. And I think that for me is what's worked throughout my career, and where I see businesses win and where they get, hung up by just chasing after the big moonshot instead of, staying focused and almost running borderline boring business by just continuous improvements, 1% better every day. That's going to stack up into some amazingly staggering results. But it takes patience. It takes focus. It takes the ability to say no or not yet to the things that fall outside of the current priorities. And so, yeah, it's kind of how I think about it. It's not about the big ideas, but it's about those that can be executed on extraordinarily well. It's always what's going to separate the winners versus the losers.
So you talk about the importance of execution, and yet having this pressure on that society has to fall for the big, hairy, auspicious, massive, new situation that we get hooked onto, right? For the dopamine hit. But how is it that we are able, and we know neuroscience is behind this, in falling in love with the practice of business, about consistent practice when it's boring, when it's arduous, when you're not sure?
Yeah, I think and this is where the big dichotomy shows up. And anytime that I'm speaking to a group or to a team, I want to get the team very clear on what the differences are between motivation and discipline, right? And the reason we're all attracted to those big ideas, the big, bold, new, disruptive things at the high level, but also at a lower level. Guess what goals we as individuals get the most excited about on an annualized basis? It's those New Year's resolutions, right? It's those things that this is going to drive the big change in my life going into the next year, right? And so there's a lot of underlying motivation there before we get started, right? But motivation is just a sugar high. Discipline, the ability to stay on track, operating within a system that allows you to make, small step after small step after small step of progress, whether you are motivated or not, is what really matters. And so if motivation is the sugar high, maybe enough to kind of get you started, maybe exciting around that big idea, but the second you take that first step, you almost have to fire motivation as a business partner, and you need to hire discipline, right? I tell people all the time, imagine if motivation was a business partner for you and you were looking at its resume. What would that resume say? Motivation's resume would say, look, I'm part-time. I don't work full-time. I show up when I want to. That's typically only going to be when things are easy and exciting. When you need me the most, I'm not going to be here. And I think the first thing is like, forget the sugar high. Like, can you be disciplined around any initiative, project, goal, strategy to take the small steps of progress on a day over day, week over week basis, regardless of if you feel like it or not, regardless of if you're motivated or not, regardless how well things are going, can you keep pushing forward? And I think that's where that big dichotomy shows up is don't fall for the allure of motivation from the exciting things. Fall in love with the basic bullshit that comes with making consistent progress, because one's going to take you where you want to go. The other one's going to lie to you. You get to choose which one you're going to marry.
That's bang, drop the mic. So when we have this ability to future vision ourselves, do you think that helps move us along and move that needle even when it's boring and we want to quit? Like, what keeps people going? Because you talk about how so few leaders are successful because they're afraid to execute. They're not executing a plan, or they change the plan midway, or they have to give a report to the board and their numbers are down because their numbers are measured in per quarter. And this change is going to take 18 months, right? So how do we keep people in execution mode so that businesses thrive? Ultimately, as you said, we're coming into a rapid change. Economy is going to be shifting. It already has. We're in the big political year as of this recording, and changes happening economically, socioeconomically.
Yeah, it really comes down to two things. And when I see any business that has a massive strategy failure, a massive misstep, they're not making progress on an initiative, and or at an individual level standpoint, we're not making the progress we want to see. There's two things that show up over and over again. And I would go as far as saying account for 95% of failures. Number one is tracking, measuring, and monitoring. And so there's a great book out there called Measure What Matters. And so if it's important, if it really matters, are you as a leader and is your organization measuring this almost manically, right? And so is it highly visible? Are we measuring? Are we monitoring? And are we able to recalibrate and triage? Are things happening below expectations? Are they exceeding expectations? And do we know why? If you don't have robust tracking in place, you'll never be able to ask the right why questions. And I think to put an exclamation point on this, it was a great study done by, I believe, the High Performance Institute that surveyed 19,000 people, broke them up in cohorts. And what they found was the cohort that had a goal that they had set, but had no tracking, performed no better than the cohort that had no goal at all. And so I think that speaks to, if you're not going to track and measure and be able to understand the progress on a maybe not day over day, but week over week basis, you're not going to perform any better than someone who's just out there, acting aimlessly, right? And I think the second area, I would argue probably the more important one, is for businesses when short-term priorities become detached from your long-term vision. And so it kind of goes back to what you were talking about, is I think it is important that we have to understand where we want to be, whether it's 12 months, 24 months, 36 months from now. What does the destination look like? It's, what are we pursuing and why is it that we're pursuing it? Because if you don't have that, it's kind of like using Google Maps, right? Google has probably spent multi-billions of dollars of making that app highly effective for us, but it is rendered virtually useless if we can't plug in a destination. There is no optimized route to build. And so you're then at the mercy of firefighting all the short-term things getting in the way that could be completely detached from where you want to go from a vision standpoint. So I think the destination, the vision is important, but only as a North Star. You can't just focus on that. You need to get clear on it. You need to be focused on it. You need to know why you want to be there. Then you immediately turn your attention to what must be true for me to get there. Where do I need to be 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 12 months from now to be on track? So I think it's a combination of both.
So how do you factor in the psychology of humans, which two elements, fear and resistance, Aaron?
Yeah.
It could be from internal or it could be from teams, right? It could be from your spouse.
Yeah. And look, fear is a major component, right? I think fear of failure, the fear of the unknown. And there's a great kind of metaphor that Alex Hormozy has that I just completely relate with, especially when it comes to fear. And look, fear is always going to peak right before you take action. That's always where the fear index spikes, right? Because back to the Hormozy metaphor, it's like fear is always going to look like this big, vast, mile-long ocean out there, and you don't know what's below the surface, right? So it almost kind of paralyzes progress because fear is holding me back. Now, what happens when you take action? What happens when you step into the water? Oftentimes we find that this mirage of fear is just one big puddle that's only an inch deep, right? And we can walk through it. Sure, we're going to get wet. It's going to be a little bit messy sometimes, but we can typically figure things out once we start taking action. And I think that is the perspective that I love to hold on to whenever we're thinking about growth and driving towards a better future state, because it is going to force us to be uncomfortable. It's going to force us to have to tackle some of the uncertainties and unknowns, but it's amazing what happens to our psychology as humans once we start taking action. And the second we start acting and generating momentum and progress, we're on the other side of that peak in the fear index. And now things start getting a lot manageable. And so the fear of failure has killed far more dreams than actually failure has in and of itself. And so, yeah, I think you just got to take that first step and find out that that ocean you're looking at is really just a big puddle.
I love what Hormozy said, just to tag on that so many people don't make decisions, are in inaction, don't execute because they feel at some level from a psychological perspective that, particularly in this day and age with the onslaught of the self-help, and here I am in personal development, so I'm part of the problem in some ways, but I'm here to also create a solution. But it's this whole thing of like, I'm not worthy of it, I don't deserve it. And people are hung up on that and using that, I believe, as an excuse. And what Hormozi says is, you don't have to think you're worthy or deserving in the present moment. Your future self does. So give it to your future self and just take action. And I think that's brilliant. And it actually got me on this whole kind of tirade I've been on in regards to, it's time to blow up this self-help, me focused, because we are going to be called to serve at a higher level. And are we ready? Are we ready, Aaron, to be able to execute on maybe even helping others who are not prepared and are suffering? And I believe that's my role here. And I believe it is yours too, as we become and live into being the change agents that we came here to be, and to lead through this chaos with calm and vision and execution. And I'm kind of humbled by this conversation because I don't nearly measure my success. And by all appearances, people are like, oh my gosh, best-selling author and podcast, this and that. I'm like, I will be honest and say straight up, I don't measure nearly as much, and I don't track nearly as much. There's a word, though, that I believe that's really important, is that we need to, as humans, fall in love with qualities that maybe we don't like, but we know we need to own them in order to be successful. Like, I can hear from anyone, oh, you're enthusiastic, you're inspiring. Well, that's all good. That's how it came out of the box. But you know what makes me really uncomfortable is using the word, I am meticulous. When I first started using that word, I wanted to throw up. But I own that word, that I am meticulous. I am becoming meticulous, but I am owning it, that is an element of me. So that would be my call out for the viewers and listeners, is that what's the word, or you roll your eyes when someone's a certain way and you're like, oh God, they're so anal. Whatever that expression is that you resist, own that, bad Larry, and guarantee it's a gateway to a whole nother level of success.
Yeah. I was actually having a conversation with someone yesterday, and it's kind of around the same topic that you brought up, and that's imposter syndrome. And maybe I'm the outlier here, but I'm kind of sick and tired of like people talking about imposter syndrome like it's some big negative monster,
bullshit.
right? And I was telling this individual that imposter syndrome come up, and I was like, have you ever thought about the sensation of imposter syndrome as a good thing? And they're like, what? And I'm like, no, this is supposed to be this bad, scary thing that we got to find help for. It's like, tell me what you think the exact opposite of imposter syndrome is. And they really couldn't put words to it, but I was like, let's think about imposter syndrome for a moment. It's just an indicator that you're growing. You're doing something you're not very comfortable with. Sure, our minds are going to spin up all kinds of things, but growth by definition is when we venture to the outer edges of our current capabilities and we're forced to struggle. We're forced to learn new things. That is what growth is. And so if you're trying to stay away from imposter syndrome so badly, get very clear of what the exact opposite looks like. The exact opposite of imposter syndrome is a life where there's zero challenge. You're basically a zombie going through the same routine over and over again. You know everything like the back of your hand. And is that what you're really striving for? So my challenge is like, embrace the imposter syndrome. It's a good indicator that you're growing. It's like, for myself personally, do you know how many jobs I was properly qualified for before I got them throughout my career? Zero. I wasn't qualified for any of them. I was able to create the opportunity, and I was relentless once I got them. I was going to figure it out. I was going to learn, and imposter syndrome was my fuel.
Well, is another way to, people are like, if you have imposter syndrome, yes, it can mean that you're growing and you're uncomfortable. But a lot of people who are using, oh, I have imposter syndrome, are doing nothing, Aaron.
Right.
They're like, my anxiety is so great, and if I apply for that, I'll be an imposter. But they're doing nothing. I'm not even saying that they're in the stage of growth. You're giving a lot of people a big benefit of the doubt. A lot of people who hang on to that imposter syndrome are simply doing nothing. And it's actually, another word for it is anxiety from stagnation.
Yeah. And really what imposter syndrome is an opportunity that you have in front of you to grow.
To move, to execute.
Yeah.
so good. And I'm not saying any of this is easy. And I think that that's something I want the audiences and the viewers to understand, is that none of this is easy. It's not easy. It's just that the option for Aaron, I think for you, and certainly for me, is that the option of stagnation and not fulfilling what I was here to do and not stay curious sounds terrible to me. Terrible.
And Kate, to your point, yeah, don't let us mistake you into thinking this is easy, because we're going to be the first ones to tell you it's not, and it was never meant to be. Anybody that ever promises you that growth and comfort are supposed to go together, sorry to inform you, but they're telling you a lie. It's never supposed to be easy. If this is the path you want to go down, this is simply the rent that is due from all of us to grow, to develop, to find a next level, to continuously improve. Nobody's rolling out a red carpet telling you that it's supposed to be easy, because growth was never meant to be easy.
I think David Goggins is such a good example of that, to an extreme. And I would love your take on this, where he says that, everyone's seeking their purpose and, my purpose. And he said, you are your purpose. Every single day, you're your purpose. Go live your purpose, which is you. How do you frame out the whole concept of living a fulfilling life or living a purposeful life?
Yeah, when I think of purpose and fulfillment, it's usually living underneath everything that we're talking about. When I go back to the moments in my life where I was in cruise control, where I was when things were easy and it was just, I could just kind of coast through, that's when I was the unhappiest. I think we all find purpose and fulfillment in the moment of challenge, when we're forced to work hard for something that we want to achieve, is where the biggest amount of purpose and fulfillment is going to come out at the other end. I mean, you just think about anything in life, whether it's business, sports, personal life. When you have to work really hard to achieve something, I don't care what anybody says, it's going to feel a hell of a lot better upon achievement versus someone handing it to us on a silver platter. And so whatever it is that you're striving for, and some of these things show up, the discomfort, the imposter syndrome, the uneasiness, I think that's where purpose lives. And there's a reason why so many people are buying all the self-help books around how to find my purpose, is because there's so many people looking for it, while at the same time they're avoiding that discomfort and that challenge where the purpose and fulfillment lives within. And so it's go towards the struggle, not run away from it, because on the other side is typically going to be where all the purpose and fulfillment you're looking for, that's where it lives. And I think a great quote, I don't know who to attribute this to, certainly not mine, but one of the best quotes I've ever heard is that the magic you are looking for is in the work you are avoiding. And for me, I think back to that David Goggins message, that's it. Don't trick yourself into thinking that all of your purpose and fulfillment is going to come from easy street, because it's not.
And it doesn't even sound like fun.
Yeah.
I guess that's the thing, is that I equate effort with pleasure. And I know that that's not necessarily standard fare, but I think that I've challenged myself enough physically, mentally, emotionally, even through grief, especially through grief, to be honest, where I've learned my biggest lessons in life, for sure. So if you have someone, if someone's listening right now and they're like, yeah, what do you know, Aaron and Kate? And what would you say? Because if I was listening and I was feeling not motivated, because I have this week, I had particularly some times where I was reaching out to my coach and saying, I quit. And I go, ha, not ha, ha. I quit, ha, which is, I'm only kind of kidding. Right. But I still have the sense of humor. Right. But if we're standing on the precipice and we're looking down and it looks monstrous, that other side is so seemingly so far away, right? The chasm. How do we break that up and step forward and execute into our life, Aaron? What are some of the steps that someone can do that maybe they're not meticulous type of people? Maybe they don't have the discipline. What do you want them to hear?
Look down. And what I mean by that is, with any goal that we have, with any initiative, any project, any strategy, we as humans can become overly excited by the finish line. And so I kind of think about this as a mountain. If we're climbing a mountain, we're looking at that big flashing sign that is our destination on top of the mountain. So if that's where we're focused, there are going to be things in life where there's going to be curveballs, there's going to be bad days, there's going to be bad weeks, there's going to be the unexpected thing happen. And if our focus is way up there on the top of the mountain, it's so easy for us to sit back and say, oh my God, that's so far to go. I don't know if I can do it. I'm sending the message to my coach, I quit, right? Look down. It's not about the top of the mountain. It's about the very next step. It's the only thing you need to focus on, whether you're motivated or not. Have the discipline to break it down to the very next step. Once you take that step, shift the focus to the very next step. And so much of what you just said is too many people are just looking up. They're looking at the top of that mountain with the flashing sign, and it's not about that. That flashing sign is just the accumulation of one more step and then one more step and one more step. So for those listening to this that don't feel motivated, feel like sending that text of saying, I quit looking at the top of the mountain. Look down. Focus on taking one step. And then once you do, look back. We made progress. And the one thing about how we are biologically wired is that we love and need to see proof. We need to see evidence. We need to feel like we're making progress. So quit looking at the top of the mountain, take that first step, acknowledge that a step was taken, and then focus then on the very next step. Because that view from just looking at the top of the mountain all day is going to kill you. It's going to make it look like it's too far away and you should give up. Look down, focus on the next step.
It's so good. It's so good. Because that's what I did after I sent that text. I was like, I quit. All right, what's the next thing I got to do? And it's just moving from one little minuscule satisfaction to the next. And then being proud of yourself and looking back at the mess that we've lived through, because it's a mess. Life is messy. And I think that part of our own sense of purpose is, as you aptly stated, it's instead of looking for it, it's living into it. I sort of paraphrased it like that, but here we are looking for it, live in it, roll in it.
I think there has to be a balance there, right? And look, I know you're big into mindsets as much as I am as well. And I'm sure you've probably heard about the concept from another great coach where he kind of refers to it as the gap versus the gain mindset. And my rule here is never let either one exceed 50%. Try to balance the gap versus the gain. And it's back to that blinking sign at the top of the mountain. That's the gap mindset, where all you're focused on is the gap between where you are versus where you want to be. And if that's what you're focused on, that can look like there's a hell of a long way to go. And when you're having a bad day, if you're just focused on the gap, you're much more likely to drop that text, I quit, right? But you need to balance the gap mindset with the gain mindset.
Sure.
Look back sometimes. Look at how far you've come. Give yourself that proof and that evidence that you've built through action of where you started and where you're at now. Try as hard as you can to balance those. Don't let either one exceed 50%. And that allows you to say, I have come a long way. Of course, there's a long way to go, but I'm going to focus on the very next step to make progress. So instead of looking at the distance of where you ultimately want to be, bring that in. What do I need to do today? Take that first step. Acknowledge the gain. Also acknowledge there's still a gap. We're going to just take one step. Where do I want to be by the end of the day to keep making progress forward?
I do a done list too. When I'm feeling extra stressed, I actually track my done. And I find that to be extraordinarily satisfying. And I'll just actually write it down, even though I have a list of things to do and I could go through my calendar or whatever else. But I actually will just sit down and handwrite all the things that I completed, as small as it could be. Like did a load of laundry, folded and put it away. Like just going through my whole day so that I can give myself that sense of satisfaction, because that's another part of what keeps us going, is having those moments of satisfaction. And something very important that I want people to hear is that you've got to be able to laugh at yourself, because this ride is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. And I think that one of the ways that I certainly say is my superpower is to be able to infuse humor when things are heavier, when I'm getting heavy on myself, or when situations feel weighted, understanding that it's a quick ride, Aaron, it's a quick ride. And let's enjoy it along the way. Let's live into it along the way.
That's right. Yeah, it's like we shouldn't take this whole thing called life seriously, right? And we're so worried about what other people think, how it looks, and any misstep is a crisis to our identity, when in reality is nobody really cares. You think all those people you're worried about looking stupid in front of are actually paying attention to you? They're dealing with the same internal mindset stuff that you are. They're worried about themselves. They're not worried about you. And so sometimes we just have to remind ourselves of that and say, I've got a path. I know why my path is the path. I'm going to keep making those daily steps of progress, getting 1% better to keep moving in the right direction. Because I think momentum is a fickle animal. It's the hardest thing to gain, yet it's the easiest thing to lose. So it's contagious. So when you're making steps of progress, no matter how small, kind of back to that list, I did the laundry, I washed the dishes, whatever it is, momentum is contagious, but so is a lack of momentum. And so action or inaction today will ultimately be the determining factor whether you're going to have action or inaction tomorrow. You choose.
I love the idea of gathering momentum, because to start is hard. To keep it going is definitely easier. Just think about, once you switch into that fourth gear, that feeling of like, and to lose it, just think about all the people that have, dieting. It's like I've competed 17 years in bikini. And every time I have to start that diet, I'm a little angry. I have to admit, for me to gain the momentum to get back in the swing of things. And I really, truly do exactly what you said. I look down. I can't, because if I look up, I wouldn't do anything. And I do believe it is the gift of ADHD, is the hyperfocus. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for my apparent dysfunction to most people. This has been amazing. I'm so grateful for you. This has been just a magical exchange of ideas and concept and quotes and books. And I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you for having me. Pleasure was all mine. And yeah, I think having conversations like this is what it's all about. Hopefully the audience had some great takeaways, and if nothing else, some new concepts to really help shift a bit of the status quo perspectives they may have.
Yeah, let's blow that up. And where can people find you, Aaron?
Yeah, the two places I would say I hang out the most. The first is LinkedIn. I'd love for anyone in your audience, feel free to connect with me. I'm trying to put out value add content to my community almost on a daily basis to, if nothing else, to make you think differently than you may have the day before. And then to learn a bit more about me, you can always go to my website, which is performancemindsetcoaching.co, where that's where you'll learn a bit more about the methodologies, the approach, and exactly how I help is all going to be found right there. So between those two places, yeah, that's where you can find me.
Let's go. Well, thank you so much for the viewers and listeners of Master Your Life. I'm grateful you joined us. And just remember your purpose. We don't have to look for it. You just have to lean in and look within. Expand and grow, peeps. Today's your day to shine. Take good care and see you again next time.